We've all seen the headlines in the news of how somebody lost their life in an act of cold-blooded murder, and it grabs your attention, but have you ever stopped to think about the life of the person at the center of the news story? These victims were way more than a salacious headline. I'm Eric Carter-Londine, and my podcast, The Murder in My Family, dives into some of those stories to help listeners get to know the person who was lost, and how their death affected those closest to them. Listen to The Murder in My Family everywhere you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective,
and Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together, we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Loukthayoth Phiangdae was born on December 9, 1984, in Laos, to parents Byo-long and Thongbae Phiangdae. What we know about Luke, as he was known, is almost entirely thanks to a long-form article by journalist and editor Eric Trent, who is friends with Luke's brother Robert. His article about the missing child case appeared in the June 13, 2024 edition of The Chronicle, a newspaper located in Centralia, Washington. Eric is also our guest today. In the 1960s, Luke's father, Byo-long, reportedly supported the U.S. in the Vietnam War and joined the CIA's Special Guerrilla Units. The family told Eric that Byo-long was captured by Communist Laos forces in 1975 and sent to a prison camp. He remained a prisoner for 13 years, and 6 of his 7 children were born there. Finally, in 1987, the entire family was released, granted U.S. citizenship, and immigrated to the U.S. They settled in South Bend, Washington, in 1989, and both parents found jobs in the seafood industry. They saved enough money to buy a home on Crescent Street in tiny logging town Raymond, Washington, in 1990. In February 1996, Luke was 11 years old and had 6 brothers and sisters. Luke was the 5th oldest of the 7 Phiangdae children and was described as a typical boy. He loved video games, dodgeball, and playing outside. Around 7 p.m. on the night of the 6th, Luke was wrestling with his 6-year-old brother in the house. Their parents had recently come home from a long day of working at an oyster cannery, and their father got angry and chided Luke for roughhousing. He instructed Luke to take a shower and go to bed. According to his sister Osa, Luke seemed hurt by his father's sharp rebuke. Luke went to the bedroom he shared with some of his siblings and closed the door. After about 15 minutes, Byo-long realized Luke was not in the shower. He tried the bedroom door and found it locked. He pried it open and discovered the room empty. The screen was off the window in the first-floor room, and Luke was gone. Luke's parents were very concerned as time passed and Luke did not return. The February night was cold, 52 degrees, and rainy. Luke's siblings searched the neighborhood on foot, and Boileau drove around in the family van looking for Luke. Sister Osa Gilstrap, who was 15 at the time, told the reporter Eric Trent, quote, "They went out to almost every Asian family in Raymond and South Bend looking for him. They didn't get home until 3 a.m. Nobody saw anything. It was so strange. Somebody took him." End quote. The Phiangdaes called the Raymond police at 9:42 p.m. Police told them to give it until 11, and when Luke didn't return by then, Officer Bill Wilson came to the house and inspected Luke's room. He told Eric that there was no sign of anything amiss in the bedroom. The window screen was on the ground next to the house, and there were no signs of any footprints in the grass, Officer Wilson noted. Police checked the homes of Luke's two best friends, Loukthayoth Phiangdae and Chan Yam Miao, but they hadn't heard or seen from Luke even though they had all played video games earlier in the day. They also checked to make sure Luke hadn't gone to his older brother's basketball game, but he hadn't. Officers searched until about 3 a.m. After daylight the next day, the police brought Luke's parents in to file an official missing persons report. Luke didn't show up at school the next day, and it was clear something was very wrong. Officer Wilson's brother, Tom Wilson, was the Raymond police chief, and he mobilized a large-scale search for the boy that Eric reported stretched from 1 mile from the North Fork Willapa River Bridge on Highway 101 to Milepost 1 on State Route 105 toward Tokeland. They checked all the places Luke liked to go, including the woods near his home, a large Laotian resident apartment complex he had been to in the past, and the banks of the Willapa River. More than 30 experienced search and rescue personnel, choppers, and volunteers continued to search for the next week using tracking dogs, but found not one trace of Luke, although an initial scent was picked up by the search dogs and petered out. A witness, Debbie Boone, and her 12-year-old son Chase believed they saw Luke that night running across a bridge toward Raymond at around 7 p.m. Chase knew Luke's sister and had been to his home, and was confident that he recognized Luke under the streetlights on the bridge, which was about a half-mile from Luke's house. Debbie told Eric, quote, "We were coming back to Riverdale and it was pouring down rain. He was on the Riverdale side of the bridge, and he was running towards town. I would never have even noticed except for the fact that it was raining and he didn't have a coat." This sighting of Luke is believed to be credible, but no one knows where he went after the bridge. Special Agent David Moriguchi, who worked on missing persons cases for the FBI out of the Vancouver, Washington field office, came to Raymond a week after Luke went missing and assisted in the search for the boy. He expressed frustration that there were no leads to go on. Quote, "Not the type of kid who would be kidnapped for a ransom. The only other thing it could be was child sex abuse. There was no evidence of that. He just disappeared," Moriguchi told Eric. America's Most Wanted covered the case in Season 9 on March 2, 1996. No tips proved helpful. There are several theories about what could have happened to Luke. One of the most popular is that he was abducted after crossing paths with someone dangerous. A yellow car was seen in the area by Officer Wilson that night, and it has never been identified. Police considered whether Luke's father could have harmed him. According to the Chronicle, the Phiangdaes were suspicious of police, didn't speak English, and were not very cooperative, passing along only minimal information. Boileau passed a lie detector test, but had possibly learned to defeat the tests in his time in the military and at the prison camp. According to Eric's reporting, the lead detective on the case, Ron Davis, suspected Boileau. Davis named his 2 canines after Luke and spent years looking for the child. He told Eric, quote, "One of Luke's shoes was found in his bedroom the next morning, and he only had 1 pair of shoes." End quote. Whether Luke had a second pair of shoes at the time is totally unclear, but a tip also came in that someone had overheard Luke's 17-year-old brother tell someone that his father had killed Luke, but he couldn't talk about it for fear of repercussions. The brother, Tao Luke, denied this when Davis questioned him. Another theory is that Luke drowned in the Willapa River. The river was running high and strong at that time of year because of runoff, but it was low tide 90 minutes after Luke vanished, and boats in the river did not find him. Dogs trained to search underwater also failed to detect his scent. But Luke didn't know how to swim, and if he did fall on the river, he possibly drowned and washed downstream toward the Pacific Ocean. There is always the possibility that Luke ran away, but the family stresses that he had never done so before, and he wouldn't have wanted to leave his family and friends. He didn't take anything with him, so it is felt that this theory is less likely than some of the others. Eric submitted a FOIA request for the case file but was denied all but some emails. He reports, quote, email records also showed the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, has assisted Raymond police with investigating Luke's disappearance since at least 2018, end quote. NCMEC representatives reviewed the entire case file and recommended interviewing the family. The NCMEC review resulted in the conclusion that Eric was dead, and his body was in one of the many wooded areas around Raymond. Why exactly they arrived at this conclusion is unknown. As part of his investigation into Luke's missing persons case, Eric reviewed all documented unidentified human remains in the area from Vancouver Island to the northern border of California. None match Luke's physical description. Eric reports that both of Luke's parents and his little brother Robert are all deceased. The DNA of both parents has been entered into the CODIS Unidentified Human Remains database for comparison purposes should a body or a live person claiming to be Luke ever materialize. Unfortunately, there are no physical items in evidence that can be tested for DNA to determine what happened to Luke. Loukthayoth Phiangdae was last seen standing between 4'2" and 4'5" tall and weighing 65 pounds. He was wearing a blue shirt, black pants, a black jean jacket, and sneakers when he was last seen. The Raymond, Washington police are handling this endangered missing persons case. If you have any information about Luke, contact Raymond Police at 360-942-4100. Mike Morford sat down with Eric Trent, the author of Mystery of Missing Raymond Boy Still Lingers 28 years later, to talk about Luke's case. That conversation is coming up after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for coming on Missing Persons to talk about Luke's case with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We're going to get into the details surrounding Luke's case and the details around it, what happened, what we know, what we don't know. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background and how it was that you came to wind up researching and writing about Luke's case.
Yeah, so I am a editor at a newspaper in Bellingham, Washington, and I was friends with Luke's younger brother, Robert, who died in 2021. And so I just decided to do this in my own time and kind of pay homage to Robert and try to figure out, what happened to his brother. And I was, most of my career as a journalist was as a sports reporter and editor. So this is like my first foray into investigative journalism. So I was just kind of learning as I went, and this is basically, 8 months of investigation and research led to this story.
And what were some of the challenges going from, writing about sports to something like this puzzling missing persons case?
Yeah, in sports, when you interview an athlete after a game or something, or a coach, they're usually happy to talk to you. But in this, I was going to homeless camps to track down sources and stuff, and people don't want to talk, or memories have faded in the past 20 years. And so it was really difficult. It was a big challenge trying to track everyone down that was involved in this case. People have moved, people have died. So it just took a long time to finally try to piece everything together.
So you were friends with Luke's brother. You didn't know Luke himself, though, correct?
Nope, I was friends with his younger brother after he disappeared.
Okay. And then was this something that really haunted the family all those years and hung over them?
Oh, it did. Yeah, it definitely did. The parents, so all the siblings, most of the siblings, there's Luke had six siblings. Most of them moved away right after they graduated high school, but the parents stayed in Raymond and stayed in that house because they hoped the one day Luke would come back, and it was the only place that he might remember where to go is his old house.
So it seems like they held out hope that he would just show up one day and they'd be reunited.
Yep.
And that
Yeah,
didn't.
and I asked the brother because the three brothers, there's three brothers and they shared the room, and the oldest brother, Tao Luke, said it was really difficult. All of a sudden, one day, one of your brother's gone. He's just not sleeping there in the room with you anymore. So really wore on them as the years went by.
Hmm. And you mentioned you didn't know Luke personally. You had to learn what you knew about him from his family and that kind of stuff. Can you tell listeners a little bit about Luke based on what you learned about him and your knowledge of him?
Yeah. Yeah, so Luke basically he didn't have a huge friend group. He had two best friends. It was Buvan Pimasan and Chanya Mao. And they became friends because they were part of the ESL um class in Raymond where they learned because they were, immigrants, they learned English. So those three kind of hung out in this little Riverdale neighborhood of Raymond, and they would ride bikes around and go play. There's a little creek in the park nearby, and they played video games a lot. Luke's like favorite thing to do was play video games, and he's just like a regular kid in the '90s at the time, and just kind of hung out and had a small group of friends.
And what was his schooling like? Was he, getting good grades and a good student?
Yeah, his fifth grade teacher, who was the teacher at the time of his disappearance, said that he never gave her trouble. He wasn't like a troublemaker, or he didn't act out in class. He was, basically he was a pretty good student. And his friends said at recess he was really good at he was like the best kid in their class at dodge. They loved playing dodgeball at recess, and he was very athletic. And so he was their like the best dodgeball player there.
What was the home life like? Did he have a big family? Was his house filled with people?
Yeah, it was a very large family. It was the mother and father, and then seven kids, and then also one of the grandmas was living with them. And I think it was a three-bedroom or four. I think it was a three-bedroom house, and not very big, a single story house. And they're all just kind of, packed into there. And the parents bought the house. They saved up money and bought it within like 2 years of coming to the US. So
So
large family.
was it a very close knit, tight family?
Oh yeah, yeah, very close knit. Like when the night Luke disappeared, everyone in the family was there that night except for the oldest brother was at a basketball game. So, they spent a lot of time together in that house.
Well, let's go back to that night in question, February 6th, 1996. From what I've gathered in your writing, it seems like Luke's dad maybe came home, was a little bit irritable, had a long day or whatever, snapped at Luke, lost his patience or whatever you want to call it. Can you walk us through exactly what was said and then what exactly unfolded?
Yeah. Yeah, so Luke and Robert was my friend, the youngest brother. Luke was 11, Robert was 6, and they were roughhousing in the living room. And the parents had just gotten home from working at a local oyster cannery. And the dad, I think the sister said she thought the dad was like reading a newspaper or something, and trying to wind down from the day. And the two brothers just were like, she called it kung fu fighting. They were just play fighting and being really rambunctious. And the dad kept telling them to stop. You guys calm down. I'm trying to read here. And they just wouldn't stop. And then so the dad, she doesn't know what he said exactly, but he like yelled, and he was very mad. She said it was like, it was the first time that he really like yelled at him really hard, and it upset him. She said she remembers right before the dad told him, separated the boys and told them to, you guys are going to get ready for bed, go take a shower or a bath. And she remembers, the last thing she saw when Luke went into the bedroom, he looked over at her. The sister is Osa, And she said that she could tell he was very upset, and that was the last time anybody in their family saw him, is when he walked into his bedroom to get ready to go take a shower and get ready for bed.
So he goes in there, the rest of the family is doing their thing in the house. How soon did someone realize that he was missing, and how did that happen?
Yeah, about 15 minutes went by, and the dad noticed that he didn't hear the shower running, because the three boys, they had the bedroom that had a bathroom connected and it had a shower, and the dad realized he didn't hear the shower running, so he went to go check, and the door was locked from the inside, and so he pried it open, or pushed it up, busted in, and the window was open. The bed, Luke's bed was pushed, it normally sat underneath the window, and so the window was open, the screen was off, and Luke was gone.
So that had to be pretty troubling for his father to see that. Did he just assume that he had gone out the window to get out of the house?
Yeah, yeah, and immediately the dad, the mom and one of the sisters went around the neighborhood to all the houses that they knew to ask if to see if that's where Luke had gone. And the dad jumped in the family van, they had a white van, jumped in the van and started going further out towards downtown Raymond to see if, how far he had gotten or if he could find him.
And there was no sign of him when they were looking for him, I'm assuming.
Nothing was ever found, not a shoe, not anything. Well, one of the interesting things is one of the detectives later on said that one of the shoes that Luke normally wore was still in the bedroom.
And was that a shoe that he would have been wearing supposedly when he went out?
Yeah, well, the detective told me that Luke only had one pair of shoes, but I later asked the older brother, and he doesn't know for sure if Luke had another pair of shoes, but he thought it was highly unlikely that Luke only had one pair of shoes at the time. He said he remembers that they all kind of had a couple different pairs, each of the kids did. So there's kind of a little discrepancy there. I'm not quite sure which one is accurate.
Was it that only that one shoe found though?
Yeah, yeah, the second one was never found. Yep.
Hmm. It's
Which,
interesting
yeah,
because if he's needs to wear something to go out the room and it is his only pair of shoes, you think he would have both. But even if he had a spare pair and was wearing that spare pair, why would he take one shoe with him? That's a little strange.
exactly. You'd think the other pair would have been found if he didn't, if he was wearing another pair.
Hmm.
The other shoe would have been found.
So, and I'm just, before we get to police involvement and that kind of stuff, was there any evidence to suggest that maybe someone forced him to go out of the house, or was it pretty clear that Luke himself had just taken off his own screen and everything and gone out willingly?
Yeah, well, the first officer that arrived, and it was about an hour and a half after Luke disappeared, he said nothing looked out of place in the house. Like there was nothing was overturned in the bedroom or anywhere else in the house. Nothing was out of place. And he also checked outside the window, and he said there were no footprints in the grass. There was he said the grass was kind of longer too, and it didn't look like he said it didn't look like anybody had been like walking through the grass below the window or jumped out the window or even, it didn't look like there was any disturbance at all, and there was no fingerprints on the outside of the window, like somebody had grabbed him. And the screen was laying next to the side of the house. And the older brother says that he thinks the screen had already been off the window long before, because the older brother would sneak out in the middle of the night and go like hang out with friends. So the screen might already been off.
That's interesting. And would there have been likely footprints there if Luke himself had jumped down? Would that have left footprints, do you think?
You would think, but also Luke's teacher said that he was in fifth grade at the time, and she said that he was about the size of a second grader. And in my story, I have a photo of him with a few of his classmates, and you can tell he's like a foot shorter than the rest of the kids in his class. He was smaller than all the girls in his class. He was a very small kid, and he was like, can't remember, 65 pounds or something at the time. And so I mean, maybe he could have jumped out and not left a big footprint or something, but it's hard to tell when you don't know how tall the grass was for sure or anything.
Hmm. So his family immediately, you mentioned they go out searching. They're thinking that he's left on his own. They're looking around. They don't find him. Um, did he have a history of ever leaving the house or running away before?
He had never run away before. Never. This was the first time, and he never went out alone at night either. Like never like walked to his friend's house at night or anything.
So this was definitely sort of out of character.
Yes, definitely.
So the police get involved, and on the surface, I'm trying to put myself in the position of police. He's just had an argument with his father, or his dad snapped him, whatever you want to call it, and his feelings seem like they were hurt. It seems like a logical conclusion that they would say, okay, he ran away, he's upset, he'll cool off, he'll come back. Is that what the initial police thinking was? Do you know?
Yeah, he was when they first called 911, it was reported as a runaway because they figured he was going to come back. And the officer that took the call, well, the call went to 911 and then dispatch sent it to the one of the Raymond officers that was on duty. There was two of them. And Bill Wilson was the one that took the call, and he told them, the parents, to call back. So they called at 9:42 p.m. to report him missing. That was out. So he went missing at 7 is when they noticed he was gone. They searched around Raymond till 9:42, couldn't find him, called 911, and then Bill Wilson, the officer, said, if he's not back by 11 p.m., give me a call and I'll come over. And so that's what they did.
So, the start of the search, really kicks in with the police involved. Did they do any kind of dog searches or organized searches with volunteers and stuff going out and looking?
The next morning they did. That night they just kind of looked. They searched until about 5 a.m. that night with no dogs, just officers, and couldn't find anything. They did, one of the officers, when he first went over to the Phiangdaes, when they called back at 11, he drove by a park that was on the way and noticed a yellow car had backed into this little gravel parking lot at the park with its lights off. And a little unusual at 11 p.m. This is a very small town of about 3,000 people. And it was a weeknight. It was a Tuesday night. And so he didn't really think of anything of it at the time because he didn't know there was a missing child. He just thought it was a some kid ran off to his friend's house for a couple hours. But the next morning he remembered that the parents said that Luke may have tried to go to where his older brother was at the basketball game, and that route would have taken him either through the park or around the park. And so the Bill Wilson remembered that little yellow car the next morning, and he said he searched all over Raymond for it. He had never seen it before, and he never saw it again. And he said it still haunts him to this day, like wondering what that yellow car was doing or if he was even involved at all.
Yeah, it could be something totally unrelated, or it could be somehow connected to the case. Did he know what kind of make or model or any details about it?
Nope, because he said he's kind of glanced and just kind of saw it to the side and wasn't really thinking much about it. So no maker model. No, I mean it could have been two kids smoking weed in the car at night or something. Who
Yeah,
knows?
could have been anything.
Anything.
But I guess in hindsight, I think as you mentioned, he regretted probably not checking that out just to see, what it was.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned some of these searches that were done, and just people scouring the neighborhood the next day. More of an organized search got underway. Was there anything at all found of him? Any shred of evidence of him anywhere in town?
No, not a single piece of physical evidence or like biological evidence. There was no blood found or nothing was ever found. It was like it's the kind of case that makes you wonder if like alien abductions are real because he just vanished. There was nothing to go on.
Hmm. And you think, let's just say, he's mad at his dad, whatever, he runs away. How far is an 11-year-old going to make it with clothes on their back? And I'm assuming he didn't have money or any resources to survive. What do you think about that?
Yeah. See, he had a coin collection and he didn't bring his coin collection with him, which you'd think if you're planning to run away for for good. You're going to bring some money with you. And keep in mind, it stormed the entire week that he went missing. So there was a river nearby, 1,500 feet from his house, and the FBI agent that eventually came down said the river was raging, and it was dark, flooded and muddy, and so it was a big storm, and um, I don't know if he had a coat on or not because um, his parents reported that he took a black denim jacket with him, but somebody did see him. Somebody says that they saw him on a bridge about a half mile from his house. It's the only way that gets into from Riverdale to downtown Raymond to and towards also where the basketball game was. And the woman who said that it was a woman and her son, and they knew Luke because they lived 4 blocks from him. And her son, who was 12, a year older, he had been to the Pyongdae's house. And so they said they're 100% sure it was him, and he was running across the bridge and without a coat on in the pouring rain. And so
Was that a confirmed sighting? The police think that was a very likely sighting?
so the police chief thinks that the sighting, so police chief Tom Wilson, it's Bill Wilson's brother. There's 2 brothers on the police force. So the police chief thinks that that it really was Luke. And then one of the detectives, Ron Davis, he thinks that she was mistaken and that it was some other kid, because there was a large Cambodian and Laotian population in Raymond in the 90s. There was a huge immigration wave at the time. So there was a lot of Asians there at the time, but so the police are kind of they aren't sure if it's not totally confirmed that it was him.
And this sighting of the lady and her son that thought they had seen him, did that take place on the night right after he went missing?
It was the same. It was around the same exact time. Yeah,
Okay.
because you went missing around 7, and that was about the time that they were going across the bridge. So the time lines up with when he would have been there.
Have there been any other possible sightings, confirmed or unconfirmed sightings of him at all?
There was some reported sightings of him in a town about an hour away. Somebody thought they saw him in a convenience store, but the police went there and found the kid, and it wasn't him. And then there was another one at a party about 20 miles south of Raymond, and the police went there and never found him. And there was also a 10-year-old girl. She was riding the school bus, and she said that she saw Luke in the woods about 20 miles south of Raymond in a little town called Bay Center. And the bus driver overheard the girl saying this and called police, and police went out there and searched the woods, couldn't find anything. And then they gave her a lie detector test and determined that, they thought that the story was made up, and she hadn't really seen him. And I actually tracked down this girl. She had just gotten released from prison a few months ago, and I tracked her down and tried to talk to her about it. And she basically said the same thing, that the whole thing was made up, and she doesn't ever think that Luke was down there. But yeah, so there's a few sightings that where people thought they saw him, but it turned out to be nothing.
So how long did the investigation stay sort of warm or hot before it, fizzled out and they ran out of, avenues to go down?
Yeah, I think they searched about like a week or 2 where they had like a ground search, and it was a pretty big search. They had Coast Guard helicopter, they had tracking dogs, they had a dog that could they took a dog in a boat in the river that could detect bodies underwater, and it had actually found a 14-year-old kid the year before who had drowned. And they had 2 counties search and rescue teams came down, a whole bunch of civilian volunteers. I mean, they scoured the area, and you'd think, if he was still there somewhere, they would have found him. And the river, also the Willapa River is what was nearby, and every person that's drowned in that river has been found in recent memory. There's nobody that's that fell into the river and is still missing. Luke is actually the only missing person in Raymond still to this day, and the only child in the entire county.
Flash forward, here we are, all these years later. I'm curious, over the years, did the police talk to his friends and say, hey, where might Luke have gone? Did he tell you anything? Did he confide anything to you? You think those would be the people they would check with? And I'm curious if they did and what they had to say.
At the time they did, one of his best friends, Bhuvan Pimasan, he only lived a few blocks from Luke, and so that's one of the first places police went, and they searched, have you seen Luke? And he said no, he hadn't, and so they searched, his whole house, even the attic, couldn't find him. So they did, at the time they did, but in the years later, it kind of felt like police gave up on him. Because I asked the woman who said that she saw him on the bridge, I said, when was the last time police asked you or came and talked to you about Luke? And she said, oh, about 2 weeks after he disappeared. So all these years later, the only person that says that they for sure saw him, they never came back and re-interviewed her or, tried to see if her story still lines up. It's kind of puzzling to me how you wouldn't, it just kind of feels like they gave up over the years.
So, and this is a approaching 3 decades old now, this case. And I think when you get a case like this, it sort of leads to speculation. Some people probably have questioned if Luke's dad could have snapped and harmed him during this argument and then made up a disappearance to cover it up. Did they check that out and confirm that, the story was accurate, and was he cooperative, and did they rule him out as being involved in any way in the disappearance?
Yeah, it became clear to the family pretty early on that the police were zeroing in on the dad. He helped the U.S. forces in Vietnam, and then so he was a soldier, he was a scout, and then he was also in the CIA special guerrilla units, and he was captured by communist Laos forces and spent 13 years in a prison camp. So he's familiar with, probably dead bodies and stuff. And so the police, really looked into him, but he couldn't speak English very well. And so they had to use the children to translate when they interviewed him. They had to use his children because they couldn't find a Laotian interpreter, and they never did until he died in September 2023, and law enforcement never found a Laotian interpreter to come finally interview him with a neutral, translator, because, when you're using his child, you know, you don't know if the child's covering up for him or, saying things in a way that wouldn't implicate him, in a way, you just never know. So they really looked hard at him, and the detective Ron Davis would come back like every 6 months or so, and he would try to catch the family members alone, because he thought that the children might say something if that their dad's not around, because he got the feeling that the children might be scared of their dad, is what he thought. But he never really got anywhere. He said it was really difficult to try to get any information out of the family at the time. And then the family told me that they were mistrustful of the police because, they thought that the police were trying to pin it on their dad, and they didn't think their dad had anything to do with it.
Now, and did the father have any kind of record or history of abuse or anything that might lead someone to suspect that he could be involved?
There was no history of physical abuse in the family. One of the sisters also did say that the dad could be really hurtful with his words. He could say really hurtful things, and he was always like that, even in the years later after Luke disappeared. Like when the dad would get mad, he could say hurtful things to the kids and stuff. But she said that he was never abusive, and he never really hit them or anything.
So now you mentioned witnesses that may have seen him, having been questioned. His father, who was there that night, he's passed away. It seems like time is really taking a toll in this case, and 3 decades later, where are we at? Are we just at a standstill, or is there anything at this point that you think needs to be done that hasn't been done already?
Well, yeah, I got some email records from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has been assisting Raymond police with this case since 2018. They came down and they did a review of the case file, and they put it all in chronological order. And a lot of it was redacted. The Raymond police won't let me look at the case file. I tried for a long time and tried to convince them to let me look at it because, I mean, it's super cold. I mean, nothing has really been done on it in a long time. But I did see one of the things that was not redacted. There was a recommendation that the Center for Missing Children gave to Raymond PD, and it was to re-interview all of the family members again, because they thought that the kids, if the dad had something to do with it, that the kids might say something now that the dad has passed away, and that he's like, no longer a threat, would no longer be a threat to them. So, I mean, that's probably the best chance of, if finding something, but there's nothing really makes sense in it. Like there's five theories that the police had. It was the dad, and in no particular order, that the dad was involved, that he fell or jumped into the river, that he ran away with an out-of-state family member, because I did have family members in Portland at the time, that he was sent back to Laos, which everyone I've talked to says that wouldn't really make sense. And then that he was abducted somewhere on the road, somewhere right after he was seen on the bridge. So those are kind of the five theories, but in my story, I break down kind of each one and kind of give things that point towards it and then things that point against it. And really nothing, it's one of those cases where just nothing makes sense. It's just a big puzzle.
Yeah, that's a frustrating thing when you don't have any solid, road to go down. Where do you start and where do you go? As the years pass, it just seems like it's that much tougher to solve.
The thing that really makes it difficult, you see all these cold cases solved nowadays, like, oh, a 30-year-old cold case gets solved with DNA evidence. Well, in this case, there is no physical testable evidence in the case files. What the former police chief told me, they don't have anything that they can test now and try to find somebody that was connected to it. It's somebody knows something. If the only way that we'll never know what happened is if Luke fell into the water or jumped into the water and got swept out to the ocean, which could have happened. But if that didn't happen, then somebody knows something, and hopefully, finally, they will come forward and give this family some closure.
Yeah, very, very frustrating and very mysterious. But you're doing your part, obviously, to help, keep the story alive. Are there any social media pages or websites set up if people want to learn more about the case, or if they have tips or any information like that they can provide?
No, there's really nothing, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to write this story, to just be even like a record of history. Because before, when you would Google Luke's name, it was just, you could just get the basic details: his height, weight, here's what he was wearing, and he got in an argument with his dad and jumped out the window. Like, that was literally the only thing you could find on the internet. So, I mean, my story is basically the only record of what happened in his case. And if you have any tips, send them to Raymond Police Department. They're still investigating the case, and hopefully somebody knows something.
Yeah. And where can people find you and reach you, or check your work out?
Yeah. So this story is published in the Daily Chronicle in Centralia. But I don't work for that newspaper. I just use that one because it's close. It's the biggest newspaper that's close to Raymond. I work for Cascadia Daily News in Bellingham as an editor. And then if somebody wants to reach me for any reason, my email address is erictrent26@gmail.com.
And just, before we wrap up, I want to sort of put you on the spot based on everything you've read and everything and what you've been able to put together. What's your favorite theory about what happened?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth. The two most plausible ones I think happened is he was either abducted either by someone he knew, which I think is more likely, or a stranger. So he was abducted soon after he was saw on the bridge, or his father had something to do with it, either accidentally or on purpose, but those are the two most likely, but I'm still not, I mean, both of them still kind of don't make sense to me. I mean, there's just no evidence that points at either one, but I think those are the two most likely ones.
Yeah, very, very frustrating. And I'm just
Yeah.
curious, we started out by saying that you were a sports writer, but now you've written this. Does this sort of draw you into talking about missing people, and you might go down this avenue for future stories about people, or do you think you're going to go back to sports as a little bit too dark a subject matter for you?
I enjoyed researching this because in sports it's all kind of meaningless. It's fun, but you're not really making a difference in the world. And with this, it felt like I was actually doing something with substance that was, helping someone, helping a family. So I really liked it. But also, I grew up near Raymond, in the town next to Raymond, so I knew a lot of the people already that were connected with this case. So it kind of made it a lot easier than it would have been if some journalist from out of state tried to do it. So I recognize that maybe it was easier than it would if I tried to take on another case. But I would like to, maybe try to write another one about a missing person. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely a different subject matter for sure than the sports where it's sort of know all the details and you're just recapping what happened and getting opinions. With the missing persons case, there's a whole bunch of unanswered questions, and sometimes at the end of the day we just don't have those answers, unfortunately.
Yeah, very frustrating.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on to discuss this case. It's very tragic, and to not have answers, his family not have answers all this time, but it's good that you're keeping a story out there, so thanks for coming on and sharing it with us.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me and allowing me to get this story out into the world so people can know who Luke is and was, and hopefully try to find some answers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/missingpersonspod. We're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. And of course, you can find us and contact us through our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.